If net zero were actually achieved, that is the end of net amounts of CO2 going into the atmosphere, it's never going to happen. The only way it could happen is if we adopted nuclear energy on a large scale. And that could be done. In 100 years, we could be basically get off of at least 50 to 75% of the fossil fuels we're using today. Everything stationary can be provided by nuclear energy. Heat and electricity in buildings. Like buildings use about 30 to 40% of all the world's energy. Everything in those buildings can be done with either heat or electricity. Electricity making the heat, or electricity running things and making light and all of those things. So we could, right there, we could replace all of the huge ships' engines with nuclear propulsion. The Russians have 6 nuclear-powered icebreakers in the Arctic. The nuclear navies, of which there are 6, have nuclear-powered submarines which go underwater for 3 months with 100 nuclear missiles. If you can do that with nuclear propulsion, you can take a supertanker or a cargo ship. And so all those ships, I forget how many thousands, 50,000 ships, I think, all burning fuel, could all be run by nuclear energy. It's easy, running a nuclear energy facility is not any harder than running any other kind of facility. If you're trained to do it, it's easy. And the United States and Canada, between the two of them, I know you have 2 nuclear reactors. I've been to South Africa on the invitation of the nuclear industry when you inherited the Pebble Bed reactor project from the Germans. And so I came down there and did a speaking tour.
2008, you spoke at the University of Victoria.
Yes.
That was my university. In fact, I was
Really?
at that university at the time.
Yes, it was a wonderful tour. I really enjoyed it, and I saw a lot of South Africa as a result, and met a lot of really interesting people. But the strangest thing that Germany would give up nuclear power. They're the epitome of engineering, but the German psyche is a dual psyche. On one hand, they're very scientific and very rigorous. On the other hand, they have this fantasy of nature. There's a whole group of people in Germany that have a club where they dress up like North American Indians did in the past. Meyer, I think is his name, created this fantasy trip. And so they have a childlike attitude towards nature. Many Germans come to Canada for the nature experience of the national parks and Rocky Mountains. They have this other side of them besides the technical side. But it's sort of like a dual personality. And the fantasy side seems to have won, especially with the degree to which Germany is going along with this whole net zero thing. If we actually did it, my point would be that if we actually achieved net zero, at least 50% of the population would die of hunger and disease. And no doubt about it, because just one thing, which is nitrogen-based fertilizer, which won 2 Nobel Prizes, one for developing the process of combining natural gas with nitrogen in the atmosphere to make ammonia, basically. And the other Nobel Prize was for the person who scaled it up to an industrial level. And it's a very complicated process. If you look at the chart of the steps that are into getting nitrogen fertilizer, at least 50% of the population depends on nitrogen fertilizer for its existence today. There's no doubt about that. And there's people trying to ban it. And Netherlands and Sri Lanka have already made these kind of moves. And so it is truly a death wish in disguise, and the disguise is to save the earth, which doesn't need saving particularly.
When it comes to the net zero push, those that are enforcing these, regulations, they are not immune to the effects of.
It takes the World Economic Forum people. I think they're pretty well insulated from the negative effects. What about, what's his name? I forget now his name, the head of one of the UN agencies, who said, you will own nothing and you will be happy.
Oh, Klaus Schwab.
Yeah, Schwab, yeah. What do you think of that? What kind of a guy is that? You'll own nothing? And is he going to own nothing? No, he's going to own everything you own, I suppose. And for this reason, I think they are our enemies. Not just our enemies, but the Earth's enemies. The amount of forest on this Earth has actually grown in the last 100 years. The stats for Europe are very interesting. By about 1750, 1800, as Europe industrialized, wood was the only fuel and building material, largely. So the forests of Europe at that time were reduced to less than 10% of the area of Eastern and Western Europe, East and West. Less than 10%. Today, forests cover 43% of Europe because of silviculture, which the people invented in order to make sure the trees didn't disappear, because they still needed wood even when the fossil fuels took over a great amount of the energy. Like they used to make steel with wood, wood-fired steel plants, wood-fired everything, because there was no other fuel until the coal in particular was the first one that was really exploited because it's fairly close to the surface. And then oil, and then now natural gas, of which there's still a vast amount of natural gas. And you've got the United Kingdom doubling and tripling the prices of its energy, and then banning fracking the gas, which is a perfectly reasonable procedure. They make it sound as though they're going to blow up the whole country, but that is not how it works. In Pennsylvania, they are fracking. In Texas, they're fracking. And so are the Chinese and many others. And it's a perfectly suitable way to get energy. And the beauty of natural gas is because it's a gas, you can clean the impurities out of it. And everywhere there is natural gas being brought to the surface, it first goes into a big factory where all of the impurities are removed from it. You can't do that with coal, and even with oil, it's very difficult. There are now procedures to remove sulfur from oil, if it's high sulfur oil. But with high sulfur coal, you basically have to remove it in the smokestack, because until you burn it, there's no way to get it out of there. Whereas with natural gas, you can clean it clean as a whistle with all of the impurities removed. So when it burns, all you get is water and carbon dioxide. And both of those are very useful things. The plants need the carbon dioxide, and everything needs water.
Does this sort of speak to the point that you made, where I found it very interesting? You said that it's the carbon dioxide we get from burning fossil fuels that is the backbone of the Earth.
Yes.
How is that? Why particularly from burning fossil fuels?
Well, because fossil fuels are made from life, and life is made with carbon. And when you combine oxygen with carbon, you get carbon dioxide. And the only way you can make things burn is by using oxygen. The environmental movement has come to basically, they say they're against fossil fuels, but basically they are against combustion. They don't want you to burn wood. They don't want you to burn plants. They don't want you to burn anything, right? Because they're against, and combustion, that is the control of fire, was possibly the first step in human civilization.
Man-made fire.
Yeah, we controlled fire. We could cook our food. We could warm our caves, and eventually all the other things we did with wood, and now they're opposed to that. They act as though a tree can never grow back again once you cut it down. They only count the area that's being harvested each year. They don't count the area that's being replanted each year. And China and India, for example, have added more new forest in the last 25 years than the rest of the world combined. They are reforesting vast areas, partly because we now know how to grow crops on much less land. And actually, before tractors and other internal combustion machines were created to do farming, 1/4 of all the farmland was required to feed the animals that were doing the farming, like pulling the plow and packing the food out. 1/4 of all the land. So as soon as you have engines, then none of the land is needed for animals, and it can all be used for ourselves. So we take up less land now than we did then, even though there's twice as many of us. The numbers are very interesting on those kinds of things because, cities only take up about 2%, 2.5% of the land in the world. But people who live in cities, it feels like the city's everywhere. And so they should fly up in the air someday and go over even Europe, which is very densely populated, is pretty much green from side to side, whether it's agriculture or forests. It's not as if it's being paved over like they would have you believe.
People enforcing this net zero are not facilitating, an easy move towards nuclear power. I had an interview with Alex Epstein. And
A good friend of mine.
So much common sense in subject matter that you do not entertain to even talk about. But he makes a really good point. But he said that nuclear power is essentially criminalized in America.
There's more than 100 nuclear plants between Canada and the United States. Not one human being has ever been injured by them, never mind killed. But fossil fuels have killed a lot of people in explosions and fires, and we still use it. 1.6 million people die in road accidents every year in the world. 1.6 million, and that includes pedestrians. But just anything to do with a vehicle moving on the road causes 1.6 million deaths, and we don't ban cars. Right? So why would we ban nuclear power if nobody's been killed, except in Chernobyl? That's the only place that anyone was killed, and it was mainly the firefighters who worked for 9 days to get the fire out, and they were right there at the core of the reactor to do it, where it was really radioactive. Otherwise, a few children died from thyroid cancer because of late diagnosis. They could have been saved if they'd been brought to the hospital sooner. So it wasn't like the biggest accident that's ever happened in the world or anything. Not even close. I mean, when the Titanic sank, 50 times as many people died. And the explosions on some of the drilling rigs have caused quite a few deaths over the years. So we have absolutely no reason to be against nuclear energy other than prejudice and stupidity.
And profits, I would assume.
A nuclear plant will easily last 60 and even 80 years before it needs to be refurbished, whereas wind turbines are 20 and solar panels are 20. So you end up having to build the thing 3 times more than you would have to build the nuclear or fossil fuel plant. Nuclear plants will last longer than even coal-fired plants.
And the comparison between the two in terms of energy generation, so many people are not aware, even remotely, of the almost negligible percentage of energy output from solar and wind power.
Yeah, it's like in this low percentages, very much so. And that's partly because it's only available a third of the time.
We're looking at so many years of human progress enabled by the fossil fuel industry, which we are now demonizing.
Well, we are. There's lots of people who aren't, though. China and Russia are having nothing to do with this, and neither India makes noises about it, but they're not really doing anything. Between the two of them now, China and India are building more coal plants than they've ever built in history. So they're talking out of both sides of their mouths in order to placate, I guess, the people who are all worried about CO2, when in fact, as I mentioned earlier, we could have done no better favor to the whole of life than started to restore the CO2 levels back to something like they were in the past. That plants would prefer at least 1,000 ppm. That would make them grow better. 2,000 would be fine, 5,000 would be fine, 10,000 would be fine. And you know how they say that your plants will grow better if you talk to them? It's because you're breathing 40,000 ppm of CO2 on them. That's why they grow better. The Royal Horticultural Society in England believes it's because you're talking to them.
You've made the point that there is a certain point in the future that we can lower, fossil fuel consumption. Nuclear power would obviously be
by far the biggest technology to do that. and the safest and the longest lasting, because there's enough nuclear fuel to last for thousands of years. And fossil fuels are precious and not renewable, and should be saved for things that can't be done with anything else. And that is largely big trucks, tractors, farm machinery, growing our food. That's a place where we should not ban engines. But I think electric vehicles for passengers is a good idea, but and China may be able to produce them as cheap as internal combustion engine powered vehicles. But there's still the issue of charging stations and the distance you can go and how long it takes to charge. Those are all negatives for electric vehicles. But the idea of electric vehicles is a really good idea if we could make it happen. It's for light transport, in other words, not for heavy transport.
But people have raised so many consequences of the whole EV movement. One part of which is attributable to the fossil fuel consumption required to actually get them to market.
That's a really fun point, because what I've said is that all the wind and solar technology should have to be built with wind and solar energy, and see how much energy you got left over. It should be tried. We should set up a big facility with wind and solar in a good place and see if they can build themselves with the energy they produce. I have a feeling they can't, really. I don't think they are very green anymore, because if they were green, they would want nuclear energy. And the Russians understand this, the Chinese understand this, the Indians understand this, and so do many of the smaller countries that are looking for nuclear to be built by those countries. And yet in North America and Europe, we're closing them down one by one, two at a time sometimes.
Your advocacy for nuclear power has been one of the things that Greenpeace has criticized you for so heavily.
While I was with Greenpeace for 15 years, I could not be a supporter, I publicly support nuclear energy. Otherwise, they would not have allowed me to speak on their behalf anymore.
And their particular views against nuclear?
That it's too dangerous, but it isn't. So, here's what happened was, in 2007, I published an editorial in the Washington Post that was headed "A Green Goes Nuclear," and that was me. And so it was published under my name, and gave the reasons why I thought that the green movement should accept nuclear energy as a big part of the solution to reducing the reliance on fossil fuels. And so that triggered them to denounce me. But I went quickly to the Wayback Machine, which has recorded all the websites of everybody in the world for a long, long time. And in 2007, Greenpeace still had my name listed as one of the founders of Greenpeace in February, and that's when they took it out. They took it out because I wrote an editorial in support of nuclear energy, and I should have done it years earlier, but it was difficult. I ended up becoming working for the Nuclear Industry Institute in the United States with Christy Todd Whitman, who'd been the governor of New Jersey and also the head of the EPA under Bush II. So it was a high-level position, and I was really glad to be able to help offset the damage we had done in Greenpeace being opposed to it. I didn't speak out against nuclear energy when I was in Greenpeace. I just didn't talk about it. But the way I put it is that nuclear energy should not be lumped in with nuclear weapons. It should be lumped in with nuclear medicine, right? There's a thing called nuclear medicine, which is used to give people radiation treatment and many other different aspects of radiation used for helping people to stay alive. And nuclear energy should be included in the positive aspects of nuclear science and nuclear technology, not in the destructive. What's an atomic bomb got anything to do with a nuclear energy plant, right? Except that it's nuclear. But nuclear isn't evil. It depends on, like anything else, it depends on what you do with it. You can use a horse for evil if you want to, by trampling somebody. You know, you can use a lot of things for evil that are not inherently evil, is what I'm saying. And nuclear energy is not inherently evil in any way. Carbon dioxide is good for the Earth. That's all there is to it. There's nothing bad about it. It doesn't have any negative qualities. We breathe out. Our lungs have 40,000 parts per million CO2 in them as we breathe out. Every breath we breathe out has that much. It's like thousands of times more than is in the atmosphere. It's so thin in the atmosphere today compared to what it was in the past. It was 10 times higher. CO2 isn't a problem.
People pulling the strings believe that it is.
No, it's helpful for their advancement to say so. They have created a boogeyman. They've created a false narrative about CO2, which is actually the stuff of all life. It is the most essential part of life. That's why organic chemistry is the chemistry of carbon. Inorganic chemistry is the chemistry of all the other elements. But carbon has a special place because it is the stuff of life. It is what all life, we're totally made of carbon and carbon molecules.
What are the things that has been manipulated to demonize fossil fuels? The dirty and clean.
They say they're dirty. It's funny. Dirt is dirty, and we're not against dirt. So dirty isn't being used to mean like dirt. It's being used in the sense of dirty, rotten scoundrel, right? So it's being used as a swear word. Dirty, right? Your pants are dirty. It's a stupid thing that they've been able to get away with, calling fossil fuels dirty, because our food is grown in dirt. It's dirty. Yeah, there's two kinds of dirt, though. There's dirty dirt, and then there's dirt that isn't dirty, right? That's language for you. It's like being a denier. Excuse me, what are you accusing me of denying, please?
There are certainly a host of issues that we can address to just respect the earth more.
We live in this time right now. We're in our place in Mexico, which is called Cabo Pulmo. It's on the East Cape of southern Baja. It's a beautiful place. And our coral reef is the biggest one on the west coast of the Americas. And it's right in front of our village, and it's been made into a national marine park. And it's recovering all its species of sharks and stuff like that. So marine protected areas, as long as they don't overdo it, because there has to be somewhere where they're allowed to catch fish. But they shouldn't be catching more than the fish grow, and so it should be controlled. But making marine protected areas where no fishing is permitted allows breeding to occur, and then the fish go out to where they're allowed to be caught, because there's too many of them pretty soon. And so I think we're doing a pretty good job of many things in this world today, in terms of how we grow our forests and how we look after parks and green lands. You know, you fly over the world and you see how beautiful it is, and the only place it isn't green is where it's too dry to be green, as far as I can see, and too high to be green, where the rocks are. The life that is here now could flourish in 4,000 parts per million CO2, which is 10 times what it is even after we've put all the CO2 into it. I don't think there's enough fossil fuels to get it back to 4,000, because most of it's locked up in rocks, in limestone and chalk and marble and dolomite. That's all of life origin, and it all contains carbon that was in the atmosphere or in the oceans in the first place, where the oceans, as I mentioned, have 50 times as much CO2 in them as the whole atmosphere does. But our putting CO2 back into the environment, where it came from in the first place, is one of the most important things that has happened in the history of life on Earth. And we can take credit for it, but we shouldn't feel all self-righteous because we didn't really do it on purpose. But now we know we are doing it, and we're doing it on purpose, and we should keep doing it on purpose. But on the other hand, we should conserve the most precious fuels we have, which are the fossil fuels, by replacing them with nuclear energy where feasible. That's the end of my rant.